Welcome to this explainer on the truth behind sleeping baby twitches. We've all caught ourselves watching a sleeping infant or a pet twitching and smiling, right? But the latest science reveals that what's actually happening under the hood is a biological process that's way more fascinating than just a simple dream. So, is that sleeping baby actually dreaming? When a puppy twitches its little paws or a newborn flashes a sudden smile in their sleep, our automatic assumption is, oh, they must be having a wonderful dream. I mean, it's a completely intuitive leap for us. We see those tiny whimpers and fleeting grins, and our human instinct naturally just projects a tiny, slumbering mind watching a happy little movie. And we're in good company with that assumption. Even famous animal behaviorists like Cesar Millan, or going way back, early psychologists like George Romanes, who used to literally sit and watch ferrets sleep, they completely validate this universal idea. It's a kind of folk psychology, this deeply ingrained belief that the brain is actively dreaming, and those little twitches, they're just physical byproducts of the dream, sort of leaking out into the body. But let's contrast our everyday assumptions with what is honestly a massive paradigm shift in neurocognitive theory. Folk psychology assumes that a dream narrative happening in the brain causes the physical twitch. But modern science, it reveals the exact opposite. The physical twitches actually happen first, and they generate sensory feedback that physically builds the brain. Think about the hardware required to dream. In a mature brain, there's this beautifully interconnected web of nodes called the default network. It supports complex internal thought, memory consolidation, and imagination. True dreaming absolutely requires this mature neural substrate. But here's the kicker. In newborns, this hardware simply isn't wired up yet. It literally doesn't exist in a usable form. So the reality is, dreaming isn't something you are just born doing. It's a gradual cognitive achievement that takes years to fully develop. A newborn's brain isn't producing some complex narrative. Instead of acting out dreams, their sleep movements serve a highly mechanical, deeply developmental purpose. To put it simply, they aren't watching a movie in their heads. They're hard at work building the theater. Which brings us to a brilliant concept called the ontogenesis hypothesis. Researchers developed this framework after noticing just how much time newborns spend in active sleep. Because infants sleep so much and experience so little actual waking stimulation, their brainstem basically steps in to do the heavy lifting. It provides internal stimulation to substitute for the waking experiences they're missing out on, literally driving brain development while the baby is fast asleep. So, instead of acting out dreams, an infant's twitches actually trigger something called a spindle burst. What is that? Well, it's a discrete, wave-like burst of brain activity. When a limb twitches, it sends a powerful sensory signal right back up to the brain. And this helps the central nervous system map the body's sensory motor network in a highly organized, topographical way. Let's actually track how this loop builds step by step. First, the brain stem acts kind of like a router, sending a little ping downward. Second, the limb receives that ping and twitches. Third, sensory feedback from that tiny movement travels back up the spinal cord to the brain. And finally, the cortex registers this and maps that specific connection, creating that spindle burst. It's an endless, continuous loop of testing and mapping. Ping, twitch, feedback, map. And the sheer scale of this biological hardware calibration, it is absolutely staggering. When scientists studied infant rats, they found that a single nuchal neck muscle, that's the specific muscle that will eventually be responsible for holding the head up, twitches 38,000 times a day. Just imagine that level of relentless repetition. This relentless activity is absolutely not random noise. We are talking about tens of thousands of muscle twitches, sending thousands of corresponding sensory feedback signals straight into the developing cortex. This massive, highly coordinated developmental effort is literally wiring the infant's body to its brain. It's ensuring that when the baby eventually wants to move a muscle intentionally while awake, the brain knows exactly which switch to flip. Now, I know this next part might disappoint a few new parents, but when you see your baby smile in their sleep, it's actually not a reaction to a happy dream. It's just a reflex. Their highly active brain is basically practicing moving those facial muscles. Sometimes it looks like a grimace, sometimes it's a suckling motion, and sometimes it's just a reaction to internal stimuli, like digestion. Fundamentally, a sleeping smile is really just the nervous system running a diagnostic test. True intentionality takes time. A newborn's sleep is almost entirely dominated by these reflexive twitches and a high amount of active REM sleep. The first real intentional social smile, where they are actually reacting to your face or your voice, that only happens around 6 to 8 weeks. And actual true dreaming, that develops even more slowly, right alongside the default network throughout early childhood. Now, you might be wondering, why does the brain do all this heavy lifting during sleep instead of when the baby is awake? Well, it's an issue of clarity. Waking movements are large. They happen all at once, and neurologically speaking, they are incredibly noisy. But during active sleep, muscle tone is totally relaxed. This creates a beautifully quiet background, allowing the sensory feedback from those tiny, discrete twitches to be heard loud and clear by the developing brain. It forms the perfect high signal-to-noise ratio. And the story goes even deeper than that. These crystal-clear sensory signals travel all the way from the cortex down into the hippocampus, which is a deep brain structure absolutely critical for future learning and memory. So these tiny sleep twitches aren't just figuring out how to move arms and legs. They're actually helping to coordinate the very centers of the brain that will allow the child to learn and remember things for the rest of their entire lives. And if there's any lingering thought that maybe, just maybe, dreams cause the twitches, scientists have conclusively proven that twitches absolutely do not descend from a dreaming cortex. In animal models, even when the cortex is completely disconnected from the brainstem, the twitches continue perfectly. The brainstem is running the show. Plus, when the corpus callosum, the bridge between the two brain hemispheres, is severed early on, the brain's plasticity completely drops. That proves just how vital this twitch feedback loop is for healthy brain wiring. Okay, so why does this matter for you right now as an adult? To understand that, we have to look at RM behavior disorder, or RBD. This is a condition where the brainstem's normal motor inhibition, that exact mechanism that keeps us lying perfectly still during active sleep, starts to break down in older adults. Instead of sleeping quietly, people with RBD exhibit robust physical behaviors. They might yell, grab things, or even punch in their sleep. Traditionally, doctors thought these patients were just acting out super violent dreams. But in a total reversal of that folk psychology we talked about earlier, researchers now suspect the exact opposite. Because the brainstem is damaged, it sends out robust, completely uninhibited motor signals. The patient moves violently, and those movements generate sensory feedback. The brain then receives this chaotic feedback and actually synthesizes it into an action-filled violent dream. The movement creates the dream, not the other way around. This reveals a frankly awe-inspiring connection across the human lifespan. The exact same brainstem system that builds your brain in infancy, through tens of thousands of daily, healthy little twitches, is the very same system that malfunctions decades later in neurodegenerative diseases. In fact, RBD is now understood to be a major early warning sign for conditions like Parkinson's disease, sometimes showing up decades before any other symptoms. So, as we wrap up this explainer, we've gone from the seemingly random twitches of a sleeping newborn to uncovering the literal architectural blueprints of human consciousness and motor control drawn in real time. It leaves us with a pretty profound question. If those tiny twitches are the very foundation of the developing infant mind, what are your own nighttime twitches trying to tell you about the health of your brain? Food for thought. Until next time, keep questioning what you see and keep learning.